Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. Today I want to talk about pronunciation in Mandarin Chinese. Some people may think that Mandarin Chinese, because, the Chinese language is from a very different sort of language family than, say, European languages, and therefore they assume that it's difficult to pronounce. And I think sometimes they're thrown off by the tones of Chinese. Actually, if we leave tones aside for a minute, the pronunciation of Chinese, making the vowel and consonant sounds, is really not very difficult. Okay? The vowels, they have, pure vowels, and they have some diphthongs. Basically, of course, a big problem in Chinese is that they do not use a phonetic script. They use characters. Characters represent meaning. There are components in these characters that give you a hint as to the pronunciation, but they're not that useful, at least at first when you start into the language. So therefore, we rely on Pinyin. Pinyin, P-I-N-Y-I-N, is the sort of Roman alphabet, Latin alphabet form of Chinese, which gives us a hint as to the pronunciation. By and large, the vowels that you read in Pinyin give you a good indication of how those vowels are pronounced. And you just have to listen to a few times to notice, how the O is pronounced, the U, E, Ah, whatever it might be. Not a problem. Things get a little more complicated because of Pinyin. Things get more complicated when it comes to certain consonants. So if I go off this list here, so most consonants are not a problem, but for whatever reason, you know what? I'm going to backtrack. I was looking up information on this, and I came across this here, which is a box of flashcards that I used 50 years ago to learn Chinese. They are the best. 1,000 characters. The 1,000 most common characters, produced by the school where I studied, Yale in China. I looked them up on Google, and you can buy them for anywhere between $50 to $125 from different sellers and resellers. They really are beautiful. And on the face, they have the character with the what's known as a radical, which is a component. In this case, mouth radical, ko, in red. And on the back, they have various meanings and the pronunciation. The great thing about when I learned Chinese was that they used the Yale system of Romanization. So Yuan, looking at the back of this, Yuan was Y-W-A-N, Yuan. The problem with Pinyin is they have gone Y-U-A-N, and that tends to make people go Yuan instead of Yuan. Okay? And here we have a character that is pronounced Si, ke xi de xi, Si. That's another sound that's very difficult because it's a little different from the S that we have in English or in Western languages. But even in Western languages, there are different S's. Like in Spain, they have a very S, pues, hombre, pues, very heavy S. And different languages, the S can vary. Now, the Chinese, there is a form of the S sound, which in my Yale transliteration, or at least transliteration, Romanization, they wrote it S-Y-I, which is very helpful because it's kind of like an S-Y-I sound. It's C, C. You're hitting an I-type sound before you actually hit the I, so to speak. Whereas, unfortunately, the Pinyin version of that is X. Where's the connection? So that's why when we see Xi Jinping, for example, the president of China, most people can't really connect the XI with C. Kind of unfortunate. Anyway, and of course, I'll get into this later. If people want to put the zh sound everywhere, they call him Xi Jinping. It's Xi Jinping. So in many ways, the Yale Romanization was better. The Pinyin does things like give you the letter X, which is pronounced Xi. The letter Q, you say Q, K, Q. No, the letter Q is pronounced Ch, Ch. Now, another thing that Pinyin does to confuse you is that, you can have a consonant like ch, followed by I or U. They have an U sound in Chinese, U as in French, tu. And if it's ch followed by I or U, the natural tendency is to say chu or chuen, which is a slightly different CH sound from like cho, and even in English, church is a heavier ch sound than cheese. So it's quite unnecessary, in my view, to have a CH, which they use in Pinyin for ch, and this Q when it's chi. However, that's what they do. So you got to watch for the X, which is actually xi, and the Q, which is actually chi, ch. And they do the same with Z, H, and J. So Beijing, anytime you have an I or Ju, the U, then it's a J that they use. But if it's a heavier, like in English, we would make a difference between, say, jump and jeans. The J is slightly lighter, and it happens naturally just by pronouncing the word. So if you see Beijing, you're going to say Beijing. Except there are some people who are convinced that every J in Chinese should be pronounced zhe, even though we don't have a zhe in English. The word leisure is about the only place where you find pleasure. You find the zhe sound in English, but we have no letter that represents the zhe sound. But I can't believe the number of people who want to pronounce Beijing, which is correct, as Beijing. Okay, not to mention the fact that they want to call Xi Jinping Xi. That's another matter. So, here again. If you just, it's unfortunate, like at least not Wade Giles, but Yale, the Yale Romanization, they would have written Beijing, they would have written Zhong, like Zhongguo is China, Zhongguo. Pinyin has it Z-H-O-N-G. We don't have Z-H in English, and it's not Zhongguo, it's Zhongguo. So actually Pinyin is a very unfortunate system of writing Chinese. However, all you have to do is get used to it. So it really isn't a problem. The other thing that's not good about Pinyin is a very important sound in Chinese is the R, very similar to a North American R or the Irish R, Ireland. So to eat is ch. Now, in my old Yale Romanization, they would have written C-H-R, ch, or ch. But no, with Pinyin, it's an I, C-H-I, ch. It's not, it's ch. So that's also very unfortunate. So what you have to do is you have to use Pinyin. I mean, every form of Romanization for Mandarin Chinese is going to be in Pinyin. So you have to listen to the Pinyin and identify just how these different combinations are pronounced. You have to get used to the fact, by the way, that C is a T sound. But that's true in a number of European languages, okay? Z is a Z sound. So you have to get used to that. So I think, like, personally, I don't use the International Phonetic Alphabet. I don't know those symbols. I don't want to put the time into learning them. I think it's enough to start out by listening to Pinyin, reading Pinyin, listening to the words, and getting used to how those things are pronounced. There is a tendency, even when you do that, to be influenced by the way it's written. I've often said this. People who have trouble pronouncing English tend to be influenced by how certain letters are pronounced in their own language. Okay? So you have to get used to the idea that it's not Zhongguo, it's Zhongguo. And really, wherever you see the ZH, it's actually a J. All right? And when you see the Q, it's actually a Ch. And when you see the X, it's actually a C. And think of it as S-Y-E-C. It's a kind of a lighter C. again, if you go to this Chinese pod webpage, which I'll put a link to here, you can see she's got diagrams of where you put your tongue. I've never found these kinds of diagrams to be useful. I think you just have to listen and get used to it, and then listen a lot. Speaking of listening, as I was digging up all my old Chinese stuff, oh, I have to get the tones too, but this is a box full of Chinese CDs. A box full. I've got, philosophy, I've got history, I've got you name it. And what I listen to more than anything else, I don't have it here, is xiangsheng, comic dialogues. Why? Because we have to get a handle on the tones. So in English, we speak with tones. We speak with tones. We have tones and other tones. And so we have intonation. In Chinese, they have intonation, but it determines the meaning of a word. When you learn vocabulary, and if you're learning it in Pinyin, and even on my old cards here, they would have a marker for the tones, like xi, okay, yuan. So there's 4 tones. Ma, 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 ma. The 4th is a falling tone. And this is again described on that Chinese pod webpage. And there are funny rules, like, if you've got 2 third tone, ma, ma, it's actually ma, ma. So you have to learn that. And sometimes a rising tone becomes, or at least the falling tone becomes a right. There's a few rules there. Go and look at them. But in the end, you won't be able to remember the rules that well. You won't be able to remember that well the individual tones of the characters. You have to get used to hearing them in combination, learning them as phrases, just as we do in any language. And in that regard, I found listening to Chinese comic dialogue, gosh, I was going to show you some examples. Oh, here we are. Xiangsheng, of which I have many, many, many at home. These are the best because the xiangsheng performers tend to exaggerate. And you have to exaggerate the intonation, try to imitate that intonation. And if you do that, you will get the tones and you will get a natural flow to the language. But it means a lot of listening. And I would put the emphasis on initially getting started with the Pinyin, seeing how the Pinyin works, some of its idiosyncrasies, and then just listening to a lot. Listening, of course, to material that you understand, because it's very frustrating to listen to things that you don't understand. So listen and read, save words, get to where you understand certain things, then listen to it over and over again so that some of these phrases become almost like, Buddhist chants in your brain. Like your brain is really starting to get the rhythm of the tones. And if you put effort into doing that, then you will conquer the mysteries of Mandarin Chinese pronunciation. But you won't be perfect. And you needn't strive for perfection, but you can strive for constant improvement. That's all I have for you today. Bye for now.